Let us ask you guys a question first before we dive into this. So when someone calls about Tinnerman or engineered fasteners, typically what are they asking you? Like, what is the most common inquiries that you get or questions you get, or what are the customers bringing to you most of the time, would you say?
Push nuts and cage nuts seem to be the ones that I get the most of.
Okay, and do they come to you with like, okay, we want this particular push nut, or we want this particular cage nut? Do they come to you with a part number most of the time?
Most of the time, yes.
They do? Okay.
Or they'll come with a McMaster car print.
Oh,
on
okay.
them.
And that's the car thing's super.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
It's very rare that they're just like, I want a 1/4" cage nut.
I
or
see.
something like
A lot
that.
of
Okay.
sun prints too.
Yeah, sun prints.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, what we'll do, like I said, it's a wide and deep product line. There's a lot, you know, and it seems overwhelming when you look at it. So we're just gonna kind of just walk you through, and this PowerPoint is set up with the catalog,
awesome.
you know? So it was actually a little bit different for me because they set the catalog up different than I learned it 30 years ago. And I've been fighting it ever since, but I figured if we're gonna do this, I better at least get you guys on the same page with what you're using every day. So we've updated it, you know, to go along that. We've got some samples here, you know, that we'll show you. We got some other things that we'll show you too, you know, the basics like of the spring steel. We're not gonna get real technical, so don't worry about that. We're just gonna kind of give you a good overview of the product line and just get you more comfortable with it, right? And again, you can always, during this, ask questions at any time. You can reach out to Dan and I at any time. He said, I mean, he worked there for 25 years, I did for 17, and we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere I've worked,
You
they
do the
carry
right
Tinnerman, right? I keep following it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're going to do today. Not going to be any tests or anything like that. So just relax and feel free. Just want to make it more of a conversation. You know, if something doesn't make sense, please stop me and ask. There's no stupid question with this stuff. I'm telling you.
I've never been in here when it's hot.
Yeah, it actually is.
It's always freezing cold in here.
Yeah, not today.
So just to get going, we're here. Dan put this slide together. I'm going to let him walk through it just to kind of reiterate kind of what I said, but just give you an idea of, you know, what are we doing and why.
Yeah, and again, we're really glad that you guys gave us this opportunity to come in and try to help train you a little bit on the Tinnerman Pallet product line. And I guess, you know, when you step back and say, well, why would that be important? You know, we think there's really 3 reasons why, you know, it's good that you guys want to learn a little bit more about the Tinnerman product line. And I think the primary reason is because our customers and the market count on us for help with Tinnerman, okay? So, and that encompasses a lot of different things that we have to help customers with. I mean, it's as simplistic as just giving them price and delivery on an item, and it's maybe as complex as helping them solve a problem that, you know, we didn't create, but they have a problem trying to get a Tinnerman product line for their customer. So it's trying to help our customers. The other part of it is that as part of our role as a master distributor, we have an obligation to Tinnerman to represent their brand really, really well. And again, we're not the only master distributor that Tinnerman has, right? So we have competition. So we compete with other master distributors for, you know, Tinnerman's loyalty to us as a master distributor, but more importantly, we compete for those customers wanting to be loyal to us for Tinnerman, and we certainly want to be the best master distributor that Tinnerman has. And we think we're there, but we kind of want to keep that position.
Great.
So, you know, what we're going to talk about is, you know, where does the demand for Tinnerman pretty much originate from? Tinnerman's been around for many, many years. I mean, God, how long? Going back to the 1800s, I guess. You know, and again, they're on what we call a lot of bill of materials, which is, you know, bills of materials for end products like a tractor has all the components on a bill of material. So there's Tinnerman on bills of material that go back many, many years. So that's where the demand comes from, is that someone's supplying that tractor manufacturer, and now they need a Tinnerman. So now where do they go to get it? And Tinnerman is very selective on who they will sell to direct. So there's a need for a master distributor like us to take care of those customers or distributors of ours that need Tinnerman. Tinnerman traditionally, or over the last number of years, is very automotive-oriented business. So they have two sides. They have an automotive group, which is the biggest and commands most of their capacity. And then they have the non-automotive, which is known as industrial. So that's the side that we kind of reside in. But when you've got a automotive heavy manufacturer, the industrial kind of takes a back seat. So that creates a whole set of challenges. But again, give Tinnerman even more of a reason to have a strong master distributor like us to buffer between the manufacturing and product needs. And again, we know that there's going to be a lot of changes with Tinnerman over the next number of years of discontinuing and inactivating parts, just as we have seen over the last number of years. It's probably going to continue. And so that puts another challenge on us, is to be able to help customers when they have something that they need, but Tinnerman no longer makes it. We got to be able to offer them a solution, as opposed to just saying, sorry, the part's no longer available. What we'd rather say is, let us try to help you find something else. And that's where the product knowledge comes in, because you got to know kind of what questions to ask and then where to kind of look. So that's important for us as well. And the last reason why this is important is because if you look at that graph, that's our sales of Tinnerman since Tim acquired Precision Specialty, and with Precision Specialty came the Tinnerman product line. So back then we were selling around $400,000 a year worth of Tinnerman. Last year, in the COVID year, we sold 1.5 million. And in this year, based upon the first quarter, the run rate that we're on, we could end up well over $2.3 million in Tinnerman. So there's been a nice steady growth of the Tinnerman product line for GL Hewitt. So that means we're being successful, we're helping a lot of people. But as you guys know, and you will find out in a couple months, is when our sales increase, what happens to profit sharing? That's kind of the what's in it for me type of thing, you know. So we want to be successful with Tinnerman, you know, because the customers need us to, Tinnerman needs us to, and selfishly, we want to be, you know, because it makes us, you know, more successful. Okay, does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about our role with Tinnerman as a master distributor, or, you know, like how do they go to market or anything like that before we kind of get into the product?
Nope.
No? Good.
Okay. Yeah, and then before we do that, we've got a couple of items kind of along those lines. You know, Dan had mentioned, obviously, Tinnerman is heavy automotive. But I think what a lot of people fail to realize is these things are pretty much in every industry that you can possibly imagine. I mean, you know, white goods, HV, I won't list them all, but you can see them here.
Yeah.
And these are all applications where this type of product is and can be used. So even though automotive is big for them, you know, this is a huge end market in terms of industrial sales for this product. So
One of the things
get it
that
from anywhere.
we say, and you know, John will attest to this, you know, you look at GL Hewitt's product mix, right, with pins and retaining rings. I mean, they're used across every end market practically there is, right? Tinnerman is no different. So it's very, I guess, synergistic in that, you know, it dovetails very nicely into the rest of our product lines. And again, if any of our customers are buying AVK, they probably are buying Tinnerman, or vice versa. So that's kind of the value of, we're that one-stop shop where people can come to us for a lot of different products, any quantity they want. Tinnerman's just another great brand that we have, right?
And you know, this is point of sale. I mean, this is what we submit to Tinnerman every month.
Every
correct?
month, yeah.
And you can see, I mean, our POS has totaled 100,000 or more for the second month in a row. So I mean, this continues, to Dan's point, to take off. And I just highlighted, you know, most of what we sell is to the other distributors. You can see the usual suspects in there. But you know, in some of the OEMs, you can kind of see where some of this stuff goes. I mean, that's an elevator manufacturer where some of these parts might end up. A lot of injection mold facilities, metal stamping type facilities that maybe do some sub-assemblies for some of these other customers. You know, this product's going to show up in all of these areas. So, you know, just keep that in mind.
So I'm sure Tinnerman pulls us into maybe places that we normally wouldn't get to. You know, like, so these customers start buying Tinnerman from us, they may have demand for other products that we can help them with that maybe they didn't know us for. And so, the RSMs get this, and they take a look at like, okay, solar plastics. Well, solar manufacturer, I wonder if they have any need for stainless steel, anything, so that, again, it does feed into like leads for us to kind of help those customers with other things besides just Tinnerman.
Are these parts that like other distributors would keep stocked on their shelves, or is it more like AZ where it's bought per job or for like?
That's a great
Do
question.
we carry good inventory compared to others?
We do, we do.
Tie
yeah.
that back in.
Yeah.
But no, to answer Shelby's question, and it's a good one, is that this is a product line that I would say some distributors stock and some kind of go order for order. Typically, I think the product is used in vendor managed inventory arrangements where, someone like Endries has a VMI account with a manufacturer like Maytag. And so, they're supplying Maytag all their Class C items, which is screws, nuts, bolts, pins, retaining rings, Tinnerman. And they're feeding their line as they're producing washing machines. So Endries really tries to only stock that for which they need to supply to Maytag. So they're not like stocking it in like we do, where we put parts on the shelf hoping that we sell it to a lot of people. Whereas Endries is very customer specific. And I think a lot of other distributors are the same way with Tinnerman, unless they're a master distributor like us, and there's only a few that are like us that stock in anticipation of demand so that we have the product that a lot of people can come to us for, just as we have seen with this activity.
Yeah. And to answer your question a little bit further, John, I would say that there may be someone out there that stocks as much Tinnerman product as us, but not any more than we do. So, there's us and...
I know we've done well with obsolete parts. I mean, I've been amazed at some of the things that we found that we actually had that were not even supposed to be out there anymore.
Right.
We've been blessed quite a bit with that kind of thing.
Right. So, for the most part, you can think, we're stocking it much heavier than most other distributors out there. And to Dan's point, Tinnerman only has a couple of really true master stock distributors. I think there's only really two, that are legit, and you guys know the other one.
Yeah.
Starts with an A.
I don't
don't say that.
I don't say it anymore. Even though I work there.
We stopped cussing.
Yeah. You guys, that good?
Good.
Real good, actually.
Okay. This is in your catalog too. I can't remember. It's near the beginning. I don't know how many times you guys get finish questions on a particular part. Do you get them quite often?
A lot of the times they'll ask, what's the -27, what's the -.
What does it mean? Okay,
Yeah.
you guys know to come here to find that. What happens when they ask you one that you can't find?
We quote them what we have on the shelf.
Okay.
We don't actually, when I quote Tinnerman, I'm not actually looking at finish. I'm looking to find the part that works for the customer.
Okay.
Then I look at finish.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. And I guess, if finish was an issue for them, they'd probably bring it up.
Immediately.
Right?
Yeah.
But just know, if that is an issue, you can even, this is where you can sub parts in sometimes too, very easily. If they're asking for a particular part and they give you that finish, and we have something else, quote them that. Just say, we don't have that currently in stock, but can you use this finish, right? And if they're not sure, they'll check with their customer. And if they're really not sure, say, can you get me a finished spec? And I can tell you if it may be even better than what you're using now in terms of salt spray protection.
Right.
It's just those little simple questions you can ask that'll keep them from hanging up and going somewhere else to find the finish they were looking for.
Right, and that is also part of being that solution provider, where you're giving the customer an alternative. We may not stock the specific finish that they want, but we have something else. And as long as you can tell them, what do we have? What does it look like? What is the salt spray hours? Like Dave said, it may be actually a better finish than what they asked for, but you're giving them a solution, and they may say, wow, if it's a better finish, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, well, you don't have what I need.
Yep. Make sense?
Okay.
Okay, just a little bit of engineering data. I've used this I've had this thing forever, but this really graphically, as simple as this looks, tells you exactly what this is all about in terms of how strong these things are. It looks just like this is plastic or normally metal, so you gotta suspend your disbelief, but, so, this is the original speed nut fastener. And there's two things that work here. You got that inward thread lock. You see that impression, how it kind of looks like almost teeth coming up there? And then it's not completely flat. There's an arch in the base, like a spring arch lock. Those two forces work together to clamp down and get the loads that you need. Because as you're driving the screw through, these are heat-treated spring steel parts, so they have memory, right? They're always going to want to go back to the state that they're in with that little bit of an arch in it. But as you drive this screw through, as it gets to the bottom panel, it's going to want to flatten out. And as it does flatten out, it's pushing those impression into the root diameter of the screw, right? And even on this thing, as you can feel, I mean, pass that around, I mean, you can feel it, try to unloosen it. You can, but it's pretty darn tight, just for something like that. So that's basically how spring steel works and how the speed nut was invented. I mean, that's what it's all about. Because some people can't seem to fathom, how can I use this instead of a washer or a lock nut and a nut itself? These are pretty strong, right? And this can tell you kind of basically, how strong they can be. And this is in the catalog as well. So just for instance, if you look at the number 440 screw, you can see that it's got a tensile load limit of 100 pounds. But just by changing out the screw to a type A or a B, there, it goes up to 300 pounds. Right? So just a different screw size can help the customer attain a better holding power with the speed nut fastener. Just little things that you can, if they happen to say, well, I don't know if it's strong enough, well, maybe it is. And then also know though, as it gets stronger, it's also a little harder to install, right? So if it's going to hold more, it's going to be a little bit harder to do during the install. But that's just like kind of a handy sheet. Now also know too, on that page, all applications are different, right? This is kind of just a generalization. I wouldn't tell them this is what you're going to get. This is kind of based on the testing that Tinnerman has done. Here's the results. But you need to get samples and do your own testing to make sure that what you're seeing and what you're actually going to get on them. Or send in your application to us and we'll do it, right? One of the two things.
The other part of this that's really important, and again, most customers I would imagine kind of know what they want, but just in case, there's two different types of screws. There's a machine screw and a sheet metal screw. And the difference is in the thread pitch. So this, down at the bottom of this page here, it kind of describes it. This is what a machine screw looks like. So it's a very fine thread, and it's 1 to 2 threads per inch, whereas a sheet metal screw is a very coarse thread, which is 2 to 3 threads per inch. And so Tinnerman makes their product differently for machine screws versus sheet metal screws. Sheet metal screws, they would make the thickness of the product thicker so that it fills up the whole root diameter of the screw thread. Whereas machine screws, because they're finer, they make them out of thinner material. And that's like what they said is why you get the difference in performance. A sheet metal screw with a Tinnerman performs greater because it's thicker than does a machine screw where it's thinner. So you get the less tensile load, I guess, whatever.
Yep. So that's the key to the whole, now you guys know the key to the whole Tinnerman product line.
So in other words, if a customer were just to call up and say, hey, John, I want a U speed nut for a number 8 screw. The first question you ask is it a machine screw or is it a sheet metal screw?
Okay.
Right? And then you would know, okay, which Tinnerman do I look for? Is it for the 832 or is it for the 8A or B, which is the sheet metal screw?
I've never asked that question.
Well, maybe the customer's never asked,
I never have. Have you?
Most of the time they give us.
Most of the time they probably know, but just in the event that someone says, hey, working on a new design, I'm just going to use a number 8 screw. Okay, is it going to be machine screw or sheet metal screw?
And again, even if they're asking for it most of the time, it's good to know what they're, to have that knowledge.
Right.
You just feel, to your point earlier, John, you feel much more confident with the line. because you know exactly what they're talking about, what they're asking for, what kind of screw actually goes with that part that they're asking for, right? I mean, that's the key. And so, as we go through, I mean, this is just kind of a good overview of, what are the benefits of most of these products, these spring steel double locking products, Obviously, easier to hit. So you have a question? Okay. This is a big one here, the elimination of the lock washers, spanner washers, other loose pieces. It's part consolidation, and it's so much quicker in terms of labor. Rather than having to I just put an entertainment center together in my house over the weekend. You get those little lock nuts and all that kind of stuff. Where just something like this, you just screw it right in. Like I said, no special tools, skills, which is good in my case. It doesn't freeze to the threads, doesn't clog with the paint. They're reusable in a lot of cases. And for some of the ones that aren't threaded, we'll get into the locking on the unthreaded studs. You don't even need a screw to have them fasten as required. So that's kind of basically the background in a nutshell of.
But you guys mentioned at the very beginning, people call up and say, hey, I want a Tinnerman. Someone may say, I want a Pound Nut.
Yeah.
Well, those are two brands. They were independent, separate companies years and years ago. And there was Tinnerman and then there was Pound Nut. And now they're together under ARaymond. But Pound Nut is a brand, and they kind of had a competing, overlapping product line with Tinnerman and vice versa, but then Pound Nut had some different products that Tinnerman didn't, and Tinnerman had some products that Pound Nut didn't. But that's why you hear people call them out as that, because that is the brand like Kleenex or Xerox or anything like that.
Another piece too, I don't know, this may help you, this may not, it depends on how different people's brains works. I usually don't use this that much, but on page 5 is what this is. It kind of gives an overview of quickly getting to where you need to be in the catalog, based on what the customer is looking for, and it directly correlates to pages 10 and 11. So if you knew that they were attaching a couple panels, you go to the panels and trim assembling category in the far left side on page 10. And then, if they had access to the edge of the panel, you could go to that second section over and be right, into the panel clips of what they might need. So, this could be helpful, and that's just basically asking some easy questions. What's your application? Are you using a screw? Are you using a stud? Is it panels? Do you have access to the edge of the panel? Or are there holes in the middle of the panel? And all those questions they're here, right? Across the top and down the side. So it's pretty handy. If that's how your mind works, it might be helpful, it may not. But it's something to keep in mind to help you get, if they don't have the part number that particular time, can I find it, right?
And that's, that Tinnerman structured their catalog this way, and we structured this presentation this way years ago when we first trained GL Hewitt on Tinnerman and Pound Nut, based upon application and the products that are used in certain applications, rather than trying to cover the whole product line. So it's so diverse, you try to break it down into chunks, make it simplistic, and so if you know the application, you kind of know what products you probably are going to be talking to the customer about.
All good?
Good.
Okay, so now we'll start getting into some of the product. And again, there's going to be a lot, but we'll try to help you out. If you have any questions on it, we got some samples here. You can just kind of take a look just to get more comfortable with it. So, believe it or not, this is an outline of pretty much every product in this catalog, okay? In kind of like 4 sections, right? Screw together joints, non-threaded joints, snap together, which don't require a screw or a stud, and then clips for wire and cable management and tube management, right? So really, all of the products that you see laying around here go into these categories right here.
4 application types, basically.
That's it, right? So it's really not as overwhelming when you start thinking about it in these terms.
Simplified.
Right? Right? So, it does get a little bit shady in a couple places. I probably would have done the catalog a little different myself, but they didn't ask me. So, I'll I wanted to stick with the catalog, so I'll bring it up to, it's really not gonna throw you off at all, but anyway. So we'll start with like the screw together joints, panel access. So what that means is, you know, there's gonna be a threaded screw or bolt, and the panels that you're gonna attach, you're gonna have access to both sides, right? There's no blind assembly here.
Right.
So you can work both sides. The most basic and simplest type of the Tinnerman fastener. So we'll start with that. It's on pages 14 to 21. We'll go through this. I mean, we'll go through it pretty quickly. But and again, they do a nice job here, I think, of laying it out, right?
Yep.
The flat type, the twin type, the onserts, then the threaded line. Here's where it goes off the rails a little bit for me, is that everything here is threaded, and then these last two go on a non-threaded stud. But the reason is because these products are so similar. I mean, if you look at that quickly, it's hard to tell the difference.
Yeah, from here it is.
The only difference is the impression, either for the screw or for the unthreaded stud. And I think that's why they put them in here though, because it's the same type of application, but it lends itself.
It's still a threaded together application. It's just that in these two particular, the nut is actually creating the threads versus the threads being there like on a bolt. Now it's a smooth stud that you run the nut on there and it cuts its own threads in there.
Yeah.
So it's still a threaded application, it's just a little bit different.
Yeah. And when we get to this here in a minute, I think we've got samples of both. We can show you the difference in the impression, so you can see it when you're looking at it, to be able to tell the difference. But sometimes if a customer, they may order the wrong one if they're not careful. You know, I mean, if they got a screw and they just see that and they give you, I've had that happen several times. You know, I always ask them, are you sure? Are you using a screw or are you using a non-threaded stud?
But you want the nut to cut its own threads.
Right? Just to be sure.
Right.
Doesn't hurt. Because they're going to return them anyway.
Well, yeah, and the sad part is they're not gonna buy just 100, I mean, normally.
Right.
We don't sell very many things in 100.
So, again, so they screw together, you know, hold two panels together, all the part consolidation that we were talking about. Pretty easy to install, very vibration resistant because of that spring steel memory that they do have in the locking. You know, prior to paint processes so the threads don't fill. A lot of just stuff that just makes ease of assembly. I mean, that's the key. Part consolidation and ease of assembly. That's pretty much for all of what we're looking at here. Right? So here's what your typical catalog page would look like, right? And, you know, John, like you said, all of these dimensions mess with your brain and whatnot. But Tinnerman has always set it up, and this will be for every category, that usually the most important dimensions are left to right. I mean, it reads left to right.
Just like our catalog.
Just like a, right, exactly. It's very much the same, you know? So if they're looking for something like that, and obviously the thread is the biggest deal in most cases. You know, then the length and the width, that's all because, you know, where are you installing this? You know, how much room do you have around this? That's why it could either be rectangular or round. Or you need the sides cut off because it's too sharp. You know, that's where you see all these different variations come into play.
Right.
Every application is different. It's amazing. That's why the product line's so huge. You'd be amazed. You'd think that a standard push nut would work for people if the thread size is right. It just doesn't, right? So that's kind of how it's gotten so big over the years. So you got your basic, you know, flat type speed nut, then the twin types as well. I mean, it's basically the same thing. It's just got, you know, if you've got two close together, it's just easier to have it applied twice at once. Then you've got these onserts.
Here's a couple of examples of onsert.
This is a little different. This does take a screw, but it kind of like fits over the head of a plastic stud or boss.
Right.
I think it usually works as an offset a little bit too, and to stop that, to be able to tighten it without that boss cracking, you've got that metal piece over it. We actually sell a bunch of these to and they send them over to the Philippines. They do some.
Yeah, I think it goes to Motorola.
Yeah, right.
And it's some sort of, you know, maybe it's like a keyboard or something like that. So you don't see the product, but it goes over a boss. It's a plastic boss that's hollowed out. And then you put the onsert on the top of the boss. And then you screw from the underside to match up another panel. And then the screw meshes with the impression on the onsert. And then that's what creates the joint. And that's a safer way to go versus screwing directly into the boss, which then could crack, and then you lose joint integrity, whereas the spring steel, metal, preserves it for, it's gonna be good forever, so.
Mhm.
But that's the purpose of the onsert, and that's just, again, another speed nut variation.
Okay. Then you've got these, more of the pal nut variety. It's the same concept. That's why pal nut and Tinnerman was such a good fit when Tinnerman bought them years ago. So again, these are the threaded. These are for the threaded studs. They call that a lock nut. This one has the integrated washer in it. Maybe there's a hole they want to cover up or whatnot. And then, as I mentioned before, these look very much the same, but these are the ones for the non-threaded studs. The ones that you twist down over the plastic boss, and it kind of cuts its own thread as you're tightening it down, right? And I think in this picture, you can see the difference in the impression a little better. As you can see, that's more like of a keyhole type impression for a screw, when the screw is driven through it. And then that is just for the non-threaded stud, so it's going to be cutting it as you're spinning it down.
Yeah, we have two samples we'll send around, and so, like Dave said, this one has this keyhole impression. That's where the screw threads into that. This is more of a thread cutting impression, where this is going to cut its threads into the soft plastic or die-cast boss. But that's the difference between those two. And then this is just another example of a single thread lock nut. And then here's some demonstrator units of,
So this is the one that's gonna cut.
no, that one's gonna cut. So these are really good examples, because these are plastic bosses.
Yeah.
And if you were to unscrew these off, you would see that they do in fact cut their own threads on the plastic box when you torque them down.
Cool. You got it?
Yep. Here's another example over that side. So those are known as self-threading or thread cutting nuts.
That's pretty cool though.
Yeah.
I could see where that could save you a lot of money though.
Yeah, and a lot of time too.
Yeah.
Because it's so, you don't need any special tools.
Yeah.
So, you got guys out in the field that are looking for easy fixes. You got them in your pocket.
Yeah.
Right. You're never at a good angle.
No.
Right. And you're trying to.
No matter what.
Right.
Nice.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of reminds you of a drive-side grease pit, straight forming grease pit.
Exactly.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
You're doing the same concept.
Yep. And these lock nuts that you see here, these were big in utility pole hardware.
Really?
Guys that are up on those
Oh, yeah.
lines and whatnot, they can thread those down just to hold something in place for a while.
Here's
To
examples.
stabilize it while they're doing other work. And then they eventually, sometimes, they don't always have to, but you can spin a bolt or a nut down on top of this as the final secure assembly. So did you guys all see the difference between those two? Those impressions?
Mhm.
Always remember, it's kind of called like a keyhole type impression. You almost can see like the screw is going to be driven through there and kind of just lock in there. That's a good way to kind of remember it. Whereas this, it's just spinning down and it's kind of, it looks sharp.
Yeah.
It's cutting
Looks like
as
it's
it's
cutting.
going down. Right?
Cool.
Okay. And that's just the catalog pages for, kind of what we've just been talking about. Same thing. But again, like this integrated washer, why would they use this? Maybe there's a larger hole where they happen to be doing the work. They want to have that, instead of having to have another piece, it's integrated right into the lock nut itself. And of course, the self-threaders that cut the groove on the way down. Okay? So any questions on that portion of the product? Okay.
And this is what is typically known as a joint, where you're holding two things together. This is, having access to both sides of the joint, where you can hold the nut and drive the screw with two hands.
Yep. So we covered off the screw together panel access. And as we got to the end of it, the stuff that kind of irritates me a little bit, those two were for non-threaded.
Right.
So now you're going into the complete line of the non-threads. That's what's next in the catalog. That's how they do it. So it kind of flows that way. So we'll take a look. And this is the Palnet line. To me, these are the most requests I get, I think, or in terms of what I think we see, because they're so popular. And there's a lot of different styles. There's a lot of different types of applications for them. But again, they're all serving the same purpose with the part consolidation. So again, Palnet push-ons. It's a very simple concept. This is all non-threaded studs now. As they're pushed down over that pin, plastic shaft, whatever it is, they're just, the friction fit is just kind of just cutting into that as you push down and creating that.
This is an example of a push-on application. That could be a plastic stud or boss, it could be metal, it could be die cast.
We sell lots of those.
Yeah. And again, it's because, they're so easy. It eliminates a lot of time, labor, parts,
Weight,
weight.
amazing how much weight
Yeah.
they save.
Right, no, that's right. Very, very easy to use. So
And
we'll,
cost effective compared to any other option.
right.
So is there an advantage to how many grooves it has? Because I know we have some that
How many
are 3,
times?
some that
Yeah.
are 8.
Yep. Yeah,
Good question.
It is a good question. Most of the time, I don't think it matters as much to the customer, but the more material you have cut out of a fastener, so you see something like this that has longer tangs or whatever you want to call them, cutouts, as compared to the Palnets that just have more like those teeth, probably get a little bit of a stronger fit of the ones that have the less material taken out of them. But again, that's going to go back to, they got to test it on their application,
Right.
whatever works best for them, right?
These are 2 good examples of what Dave just described. So this would be a very flexible push-on, so it'd be easy to push on, and it wouldn't hold quite as tight as something like this, which has a lot more degrees of engagement, so it's going to be harder to install, but it's going to give you a lot greater grip strength. So those are 2 examples.
And that's kind of what we got up on the screen right now, what he just gave you, the 2 different styles. So that's a really good question.
Yeah, but
So honestly, there's a lot of alternatives we can offer, but it has to be tested in their application.
Right. Yeah.
That's where samples come in. Samples
Yeah.
are,
samples are great.
they're the best, right?
Does Tinnerman carry a lot of them that are, special runs that are, the 10,000 pieces? Like, do they have a lot of those stocked as samples?
Yeah. They used, I'll tell you, they used to have a real nice sample drawer, but they just closed that Brunswick facility, or in the process of doing so. And someone who used to work there used to keep it up very well. So probably not as good as they used to. But fortunately, we stock a heck of a lot of product. We oftentimes have it. But we'll show you this at the end. Do you guys ever go into their portal? So, you can see if they've got it.
Yeah.
And if we don't have it, we can request samples from them.
Okay.
It's not easy. It's gonna take a while, but usually they get them to us. So, so those are 2 good examples of the push-ons. Then this was a Tinnerman part. Now this just looks like a plain, easy-looking washer, right? But this is actually, the thing to remember about this part is it's non-removable. So whenever you're working with a customer on this, tell them you have no intentions of removing this in your application, right? Because if they do, this is not the part for them. And there's actually, this is why this thing's so great. There's one on the bottom that's holding this thing down, right? These are very difficult to push down because typically the idea of this part is anywhere from like 7 to 9 thousandths smaller than the stud it's going over, right? So it's actually creating almost its own groove it's pushed down to.
Totally.
And this thing isn't, you can get it off, but you're gonna destroy most of it. So, so always remember that, if they're using this, and these are primarily stainless steel as well. Okay, they do have spring steel versions, But most of them, the standards are stainless steel for these products. Very strong. I mean, you wouldn't think looking at this, something could be as strong as this, but it is.
Do you have real life applications of like an assembly where they would use that kind of?
You know, on here, well,
Like, it seems like a lot of them are in like automotive, where I mean,
Oh,
they'd be
yeah.
taking those stuff off like all the time, so they couldn't use a part like that.
Yeah.
let me think here. There may be some on Tinnerman's website. They have like or the portal. I'll show you a link where we can go for those. But I can probably find you a couple of live or real life examples where these are used. Are you looking at this in particular? This
Yeah,
this
that's
one.
the
Okay.
whole one.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. We'll get some for you.
Because when I think of all these, I think of, you know, something that's gonna be like, I don't know, door panel that's gonna come on and off, and it's not gonna be something that's actually
Yeah. Well.
gonna be stuck forever.
Right. So this, yeah, this is permanent. So.
There was a lot of that type of product used on automotive blower motors, you know, that blow your fan or your wiper motors. They're small little fractional horsepower motors, and they have an input shaft through the center of the motor. They put one of those on the end of the shaft to hold it in the motor itself. So it doesn't play, it never comes off. So that would be an application where they would use something like that that's very strong, it doesn't have to come off. They want it to stay there, and it's really robust. And it holds that input shaft on a motor for the life cycle of a vehicle.
In the marine industry, because they're stainless, you know, they'll forego a standard spring steel push nut to have something that is more water resistant because it's around, maybe it's on a boat or accessory to a boat, things like that. So,
I mean, years ago, I don't know if they still do, but you've heard of Wooster brush? They make, you know, brush, you know, the roller brushes?
Oh, yep.
Wooster brush used one of those on the end of their roller brush to hold the rollers on.
Huh.
So it just went on the wire,
Yeah.
and it just held the roller on.
Nice.
that was one of my first accounts in Tinnerman.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah. And then some of these, you know, this has a much more dished type base on it, more height, lends itself really to automation. You know, if the customer happens to be using it in higher volumes. This is typically what you'll see on the inside of a plastic cap.
Like,
Right?
the insert on inside this plastic cap, and we'll talk about plastic caps later, but that is this, basically. So it's dish, so it sits inside that plastic cap and stays there. But they can be used individually as well.
We have one?
I don't know if we have one in
I
here.
don't think we do. But, you know, as you can see, you know, trying to get that to set. Do we?
Here's one. This is another example of,
Give me one of those, please. Yeah. So, I mean, you can see the difference, and other than obviously the size of it. You see, I mean, try snapping that into that plastic cap to set in that. It's just not gonna work, right? And these go through like a automated assembly feed, where, you know, you got robotic arms and stuff. These just lend themselves to that type of assembly, much more than something like this would, right?
and the rolled edges make them more robust or stronger versus kind of flimsy like the other ones that don't have that rolled edge.
Okay.
So they would have similar to the same function as the other ones, but these are just better for automation.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they're not doing anything that much different. And again, they are used heavily in the assembly of those plastic cabinets. Because there's got to be something inside that cabinet to hold onto the shaft that it's going over. And then, you know, this used to be a larger product offering for Tinnerman, you know, the rectangle, but they've really slimmed this down. You know, the round ones are so popular that they don't really have that many offerings of the push-ons square. And these actually have a kind of a unique impression. Like if you had a D-shaped stud instead of the typical round, you could actually turn this about 90 degrees and make it removable because of the shape of that shaft and how that impression is set up, right? So if they really needed something to use on and off, you know, they could offer something like that.
But the customer would have to be able to produce or have made a D-shaped shaft as opposed to a round shaft.
Do you see a lot of those?
I don't.
No, not anymore.
I don't. I don't. This is a pretty popular item, what we call the bolt retainers. Now, these are in this push-on section, but this is for a threaded stud, a bolt or a screw. These are used primarily somewhere along a production line or wherever as a temporary fix. So you've got a screw sticking through a panel. Eventually, there's going to be another component mated to that panel or chassis at some point, but it's going to be moving, whether it's going to another part of the factory, whether it's going on a truck to go have that other part put on. So you slide, these zip right down over the thread, and they will hold that screw or bolt in place until ultimately, whatever you're assembling, and then you spin the nut on there for the final assembly. This is a very popular line, especially metric, for whatever reason.
They look like just a normal push-on, but they are bolt retainers.
So it's just good to know that, that's out there and you can use it.
So in the end application, those would still be on the screw, but just something else
Yeah,
would be on top
correct,
of it?
correct.
Okay.
There'd ultimately probably be a bolt threaded down there as well, whatever. But that's temporary. That's never like the final fix.
Mhm.
They just need to hold it, right? So if a customer ever called and asked, do you have anything? I just need something to hold a,
Hold the bolt
There's
temporarily.
a lot of
screw
that
in
goes on
place.
in manufacturing though, actually.
right?
Tons of it.
These are easy. Zip them down and off you go.
Right. And then in the final assembly process, when they are finally running their nut down the bolt, it just crushes that part. It almost becomes destroyed. It just stays there.
Yeah. It actually acts,
Wow.
it kind of acts like a washer,
Yeah, I was
a
gonna
lock
say,
washer,
not just
because it's got
like-
those teeth. And when that nut gets tightened down, it's kind of locking, cutting into that
Very much so.
nut. So,
Cool.
kind of a genius. And you guys know.
Anyone with kids?
It's fun to put together.
I've got them on my wagon.
Yeah, I'll bet, I'll bet. The deputor caps, these have become even more popular, I think. Kelly, you'll recognize this, because remember that Fastenal that buys 1 million of those? That top hat thing, you called that
Yes.
guy for me?
Yes.
It goes on, see that wheel? These hold that wheel in place on both sides for this little tow around toolkit, or whatever you want to call it. He's got one in his yard, I know that.
That's the part that's easy to sell, it's easy to define what they want, so it's a pretty,
Right, right.
So all you need to know is what is the shaft
Yeah.
diameter?
And
Pretty simple, that one is.
there's a Fastenal supplying a place called Centrex that makes these things. They use over 1 million of these a year,
That's awesome.
right? I mean, it's crazy.
That is awesome.
So, I think this was kind of a duplicate, but these used to be pretty big. I mean, these were in the ball studs.
Yeah.
Tinnerman sells the receptacles, not the actual stud itself. I mean, they would have to go a separate place for that. This was more in kind of like aviation and those kind of industries back in the day. Don't sell as much of them anymore, but every once in a while people come and ask for the ball studs. Just know that the receptacles are still available, but also let them know we don't offer the actual ball studs. Unless we do, I don't know.
We don't, no.
We don't, it's not.
We might.
We know who to refer them to that can make it, but most people come to us for the receptacle or what's known as a spring catch.
Right? And again, this is going with it, as you can see, it should be flowing with
Right,
the catalog, so
it
you
is.
kind of know, if you get these inquiries, or this helps you get more familiar with the products. Because that's the key to it, so. So that's, there's an application there.
Don't know
That's
what
a-
it is,
this
but
a
it's
push-on. Almost looks like some kind of garage door type.
Yeah,
thing.
could be.
Good. So, we all good there? Okay.
So,
Okay, so, we've been able to look at these things where you have access a lot of times to both sides of the panel or whatnot. But then, you're gonna have these screw together areas where you don't have access to that backside. It's a blind assembly type situation, right? So there's an entire line of products that lend itself to that type of application, right? Does that make sense, the blind? Okay. So we'll take a look at some of those. And again, here's the overview of what they are. A lot of the U-nuts and the cage nuts, which you guys are quite familiar with, as you mentioned, and some expansion type nuts. So we'll run through and kind of show you some of these and what's available for this, right? So again, you're going to have a panel edge available to be able to use these, right? It can't be screws or holes in the middle of your panel. These things are going to self-retain, right? So when you slide them on, there's a little tang, or sometimes the boss of the hole in the bottom leg. If you put one on, you would feel it snap when it got into the hole. You'd feel it. You can actually hear some of them. So then it's in screw receiving position. Because again, you're going to put it on a panel, and then you're going to attach something else to it, right? So you want that thing to be on there and not have to worry about holding it or whatever, right? So once that's on, it's in screw receiving position. It's got a little bit of float, in case it's coming from a difficult angle to try to drive the screw through. And then you just attach the panels using just that one fastener along with the screw.
So on these, the edge of the panel to the screw would be a huge.
Correct.
Yes.
Good question.
That's probably the most important
And again,
characteristic, yeah.
to the point we were talking about, if you just look at the top one, it really doesn't matter.
Okay.
You got the part number, then you got the thread size. There's the panel thickness and the throat distance.
Yep.
Those are those are huge
Yep.
in identifying what they're going to need. To me, the panel hole where it is probably more important than even the thread of the material thickness sometimes, right? Because it's going to be limited if they can't move their hole. So you got to look for other options. But yeah, those are huge variables that you need to know when you're trying to help a customer find something, right? So a lot of times what I'll do, you guys said you've been on the portal before. Did you ever use their product search on the portal?
I haven't.
Yeah, they're changing it. But, what I used to do is, the guy gives me what his throat distance is, and I would just sort it by that on their portal and go right to, and then there's all the
Here's
options,
the ones you got.
right? And if it happens to be a thread size that he was using, fine. If not, I'll say, listen, I can do this. Can you change your screw size, right? But, the questions to ask, all you gotta do is look here. Here's what you wanna know. Just say, hey, can you give me this? Well, what is this? That's all you gotta,
These three things pretty much are the most important. What's the screw? How far on the panel are you putting the hole? And how thick is the panel that you're putting the clip onto?
Right. No, I don't have that particular throat distance. Can you move the hole in your application? Well, I don't know. I gotta find out, right? It makes you look very competent and, and you can quickly
Get there.
get there, right?
I think a lot of us, when we go to the portal, we just search by the part number to see if they have stock and what the
Correct,
lead time is.
correct.
That's the main thing we use it
Right,
for.
right. And we're not gonna be able to get much into the product search today because they're changing it, so I don't wanna.
There's no sense in getting into it,
But
yeah.
even on our website, we have it set up the same way. With those drop downs on the left-hand side, they're the same characteristics, screw size, panel thickness or range, and then distance, throat dimension of what's typically called. This, I know we're not at this product line yet, but this demonstrator unit really shows this really well. So this would be the panel, and then this would be the distance between the edge of the panel and the center of the hole. So the clips on there, and then you just mount it up with another piece, and then you screw it in there. You guys can play with this, but that's essentially how a unit works. Yep.
Is this considered a barrel one?
That's a barrel nut,
Yeah.
yeah, we haven't gotten to those.
Yeah.
We'll hit that actually next, but.
But it's same
It's still
principle,
the same concept.
same
Yeah.
principle with the
Yeah,
single
You
thread.
can take it out from the bottom.
Yeah. And you can see there's a bunch of different design variations depending on what the customer wants to do.
Right.
Like say the relief notch, there's just that, it's cut out here where you would push it on. It's just simply, if they're doing them manually and they're doing a lot of them, it's nice that there's not material there. It kind of just eases on the.
It makes it easier to put on the panel.
And again, back to that point about your push-on impressions, less material. When there's less material, it's easier to install. It's just little things like that that, you know, just working with the customer or working with the product, it'll start to become second nature to you. Another thing too is, you know, you'll get, especially for these, Tinnerman has inactivated and obsoleted a lot of these. So you'll get a part number, right? As long as you know the panel, there's what they call the wide panel range U-nuts that offer up a good alternate for a large number of parts. So if Tinnerman inactivated something that had a, you know, like an 045 to 060 panel, you know, you could go down about halfway down, you see this part number right here, that panel goes from 025 to 150. It'll work on that big of a panel because it's got, you see it's got those kind of like legs in there that actually as you're pushing it on will wrap around.
Yeah, I'll pass around an example of, this is what Dave was describing as that wide panel range U-nut. So it has this knockdown center that actually floats. As you put it on a thinner panel, it comes down. As you put it on a thicker panel, it rises up. But it still keeps the impression perpendicular so that the screw meshes in there. And then it's got this wide back here that again accommodates a thinner to thicker panel. So that's what is known as a kind of a wide panel range or universal type U-nut.
But it's a great way to help the customer out for something that they can't get anymore.
Yeah, no kidding.
Instead of just saying sorry.
And the variation of the size is pretty amazing.
Right.
Thickness-wise.
Right.
Cool.
We've been at it an hour. Did you guys want to keep going or want to take a quick break? Do you guys need a break at all? You want to, it's up to you guys.
We'll just keep rolling.
You wanna keep rolling?
No, if it's okay.
No, that's fine.
You guys okay with that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. This is kind of what Dan passed around.
Right.
These aren't as popular anymore since they added this to the line with the panel nut. Tinnerman used to have these 5 prongs that kind of acted as a dual locking feature because there's an impression inside of there and then there's these impressions like you see there on top of it. So it's biting on the root diameter of the screw in a couple of places. And it can,
Looks expensive.
yeah, it was a big
It does.
It was
The one right below it, are you kidding me?
Right. And it was a big automotive type part. You know, this is what we see the most of. I mean,
Yeah.
These are very popular.
Sold quite a few though.
Right? And again, there's a little distinction between the top of those. Can you find one that's
That's what I'm looking for.
prevailing?
I know I had one.
Might be passing around.
Yeah. Had the unit.
The difference is, like the barrel, if you look down on the barrel of this part, see how this kind of looks like a triangle?
Uh-huh.
Rather than just completely round, and it's visible when you see the parts too. You know, this is prevailing torque, and otherwise, you know, for an adjustment nut or whatever, you'll get full holding power anywhere on the root diameter of that screw with this
Oh, wow.
prevailing torque, right? Whereas with the free spinning, you're
Gotta go
gonna-
over the-
all the way to the
Yeah,
bottom.
this one is a free spinning. You know how you can
Go
just
in.
spin it in my hand?
Yeah,
right.
If we don't have a prevailing torque one, I don't think, no. You wouldn't be able to spin it by hand. Because it's deformed, so it puts drag on the screw, and it's gonna take more torque to drive it in there, but that gives you greater vibration resistance.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't think we have a prevailing torque one.
That's okay. You can, at least the picture is.
Yeah.
You can see this triangle. But as you can see, as we go through these U-nuts, the perception and the look of them is stronger and stronger. You know, you had the typical U-nut type, you know, now you got this with the threaded barrel, right? And then you have the option, same concept, but now you've got a nut staked on there, integrated into this. So you've got the strength of the U-type with the integrated nut, giving you that much more holding power,
Same time.
right?
Nut retainers, so it's a nut encapsulated in a spring steel cage. Does the same thing, this multi-thread engagement.
And again, we're talking panel thickness, throat distance.
There you go.
Give that, mm-hmm.
Yep. We've got a Fastenal in Kentucky right now that has a customer that does cooling units for huge data storing systems. And they've got these big enclosures that they put panels on, and they use these all day long. They just fasten them on the panel and on the rail, and eventually attach the panels to them, right? And they're big, so they want something robust, you know, that they're not gonna have to worry about. They use them, they eat them up.
Cool.
Right? Any questions there? Then we get into the cage nuts. I mean, this is one of the things you guys said you guys see a lot of. Now you're getting away from the ability to, you don't have the edge of a panel to work with anymore, okay? So you've got a hole somewhere, whether it be in the middle of your table, on a rail like that. So you need something that you can just snap in that's gonna self-retain, but you can't start it here, right? There's a square hole right here that it's gotta snap into. So these, I mean, again, talk about ease of assembly. You can do them by hand or just a small screwdriver, and you just tip.
Yeah, if you took this one out, you could put in one leg and then snap in the other, kind of like a shoehorn.
See how these legs are on the bottom, on each side, those legs? So there's in that square hole, you just tip it, and then tilt it back, and it snaps right into place. And then it's in self-retaining position, and you can shake these things. The nuts are moving, so it gives it a lot of play. So no matter what angle you're coming from, it's easy to get it started, right? You don't have to worry about lining it up perfectly, because as soon as you start driving that screw, the nut's gonna move and grab the thread.
That's a picture of a server rack. And those cage nuts are used a lot on server racks, because you can put them in a hole, mount a rack, and then if you want to put another rack, you just find another hole, put another cage nut in there, or they can be taken out or removed and replaced. So they use a lot of them in server racks.
And this is a product line that is pretty much unique to the industrial side. You don't say that very often with the Tinnerman line. You don't see this hardly at all
In automotive.
This is an industrial product, like our world product that they use. And you should also know, Tinnerman used to own this product line. But you guys know Die Company, and they've done probably a better job than Tinnerman over the years with this line. Tinnerman kind of let it atrophy away. They didn't want any part of it. Then they tried to get back into it, and they import them now to try to get at a better price point to compete with Die Company. I hate to say it, I know we're on video, but the quality is not as good of these Tinnerman ones at times. It's just not. They've been known to come over with the nuts in the bottom of the box, so we've had some issues out in the field with that, so I think we pretty much stick with Die Company on a lot of the cage nuts because of that. So
why did Tinnerman get out of it at a point?
They let it atrophy away. It was made up in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which is a primarily automotive plant. And when automotive was booming like it was, they don't care about the industrial product. And they just let the machines and the assembly machines kind of atrophy away. And before they realized it, Mike at Die Company had pretty much taken over, and they're wondering where'd all this business go. Well,
And then they tried to, import it over in China, and they were getting, thinner material. The material wasn't as good. The assembly wasn't very good, and it's caused a bunch of problems.
It has.
To where, we've kind of purposely gravitated to we exclusively use Die Company on cage nuts. We may have some residual inventory of Tinnerman, but when it comes to replenishment, we want to make sure we're providing quality, and we want to use Die Company.
We had one rejection where they had those things snapped in, and they'd go to drive the torque to drive the screw through, and that thing would just pop right through the hole. It wouldn't even, the legs would just, because it wasn't heat treated properly, and it would just pop right through. Not good.
Wow.
But it's we sell a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's a good product. Right, and again, there's your criticals.
Yes.
In terms there. The panel thickness is huge there because the legs got to be manufactured correctly to snap snug into those holes.
On these, we get asked a lot if we have them in stainless.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an advantage to having them in stainless?
It's not an advantage unless for whatever environment they're using the fastener in that they need stainless.
Okay.
There's really no other advantage than that. They need it.
It's not any stronger, it's just more corrosive.
Resistant.
Okay.
Right.
Resistant.
Right.
And there are a few that are
Right.
available in stainless.
Mhm.
Not a lot,
Not a lot.
but there's a few. And again, you know, Dye Company, this is a great line for them. Don't be afraid to use it.
I know I just specially quoted one that Tinnerman stopped making because it was a small nut size.
Mhm.
And so Mike went ahead and got the nuts overseas and then assembled them in-house.
That's what he's been doing for the last 20 years. That's why they've lost all his business,
Makes
right?
sense.
Hmm.
Because he services the customer.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
Pretty simple.
awesome, actually.
Right. And this is kind of along those lines. This doesn't have the integrated caged nut like what you just saw. These are more expansion type. And what's good about these two is, you know, for these cage nuts, you got to have like that square hole. For these expansion type, you can get into more rectangular, different size holes in a panel for an application, if need be. But they kind of work, it's that spring steel that work again. You see those things, those legs on there, right? They kind of like, so as you're pushing that through the hole, it's going to want to compress the fastener, because it's, yeah, but the spring steel is going to make it want to
If you
Pop back
have
out?
it, and pop back out.
Right, so as you're pushing it in, it's compressing, and then once those legs get past the panel, they snap back out.
Get back
So
into
like
place.
this,
And now
this
they're
would be
stuck.
the panel, right? The square. You put the nut in there, just line it up, and then just
Snap,
push it through.
Yeah, simple as that. Again, back to the, what we talked about, ease of assembly.
Are
Getting rid
those
of,
easy to remove?
Yeah, you can pinch them on the underside and get them out.
but you can see the concept.
Yeah,
This is one that has like really overextended type elbows there. But again, you know, that has to get pushed through the hole and then snap into place. And again, that's not your typical just small square hole. Some of these holes can get a lot bigger in diameter.
So there are some that have the single thread at the base, and then there's others that have the multi-thread. I think the one we're passing around has the multi-thread like the U-nuts. That's a tap barrel. The difference is it's in an expansion nut.
nice and simple.
Right? This was actually huge in the automotive industry because, as you can see, it's easy for mass assembly, robotic arms.
Oh, man, yeah.
Right? So on dashboards, when you're popping in all kinds of vents and whatever, you just, I mean, there would be 20 or 30 of these on a panel of an automobile. They'd snap them all in and just attach all the products to it.
They named it the robotic nut because it was fed robotically. by the automotive.
Right, right. And it says IP clip, that's instrument panel for the vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
They're clever.
Nice and simple.
aren't they? And then I wanted to put this into, I mean, this is for non-threaded. I guess this could have been in the stud section, but these things also self-retain in a round hole. Same concept as the cage nut snapping in, that expansion nut you just saw in the rectangular. This goes into a round hole. This is for a lot lighter duty type applications, decals, things like that. I remember one time we were selling them for toolbox manufacturer where they put their plastic logo on front, and the logo's got two pieces of plastic coming out. So they put one of those in, they got two little holes, and they were tiny. They just pop them in there, and then they just snap the logo right in place. Just things like that.
Do you guys, anyone have like a barbecue grill, like charcoal? You know, the nameplate on that canister is held on with these. It's a die-cast nameplate with two studs. They put two tubular clips in the casting, and then they just snap the nameplate on there. And it
Oh.
basically looks exactly like that.
It's that simple. And we even had when we were back at Tinnerman, had a huge application where we had to design a special tubular. I mean, this thing was, there were two sizes for Train, the HVAC manufacturer, for those units that they put on top of buildings.
Chillers.
Right, the chillers, you know, they got those big pipes in there, they're copper pipes, aren't
Yeah.
they?
Mhm.
And these would snap into holes and kind of like hold those things in place in those
Oh.
huge units.
Wow.
I think there was an inch diameter and a 3/4 inch.
Yeah, they were big, yeah. Yeah.
Now, like something like that, on a special run like that,
Oh.
what kind of quantity did you have to do on something like that?
For a custom part like that, probably $250,000.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
There's gonna be tooling.
right? That's why you don't see it much in the industrial side of the business. Automotive side, they do it all day long because they
Yeah.
have these huge tooling budgets.
Right.
Here, our focus has to be, and that's why it's good to learn these products,
I'm fixing
off the shelf
problems.
item first.
Yeah.
And that's what these people need because the volumes just don't justify making something special for their application, right?
But there are standards, I take it. I mean, there's standard, so it doesn't all have tooling with it.
Oh, no.
Oh, no,
We're all
no, no,
standard.
no.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, so everything there is a standard. All
Yeah,
all
all
those
those are
items you see
standards.
there are standards, correct, correct. Yep. Okay, that makes sense?
Yep.
You guys good? Okay, so we've taken care of all that. These snap togethers, I mean, this is no screw, no stud, no nothing, right? You're just gonna be putting some panels together. And there's a bunch of product that, I mean, this is even easier than the product we've been using because it's just popping it together
Pop and go.
right? So we'll start with some of the, again, you have access to the edge of the panel. As you can see here, there's different styles, and we'll get into them a little bit. But again, easy to assemble, eliminates a lot of nuts, bolts, screws, those kind of things. And as we'll see, there's different variations. You know, you can get some barbs in there for better retention. I mean, whatever the customer needs, these little clips can have them, right? These are fan balance clips. I think these came with the Palnut acquisition, didn't they? These weren't
No,
Tinnerman.
those were Tinnerman.
Were they?
Yeah.
Were they? I personally don't sell a lot of them. The biggest thing here is though, you know, when you think of U-type fasteners, you're thinking of that panel range and center hole and everything. For these, the most important thing is the weight.
The weight.
Right?
Strictly the weight.
And again, it's set up that way, so you know the question they ask, because that's what they're gonna come to you with, right? Which
You
is gonna
guys
seem
familiar
odd.
with
if you're
one
not
of our
used to it.
customers called New York Blower?
I never doubt
So they use some fan balancing clips
it. I bet they do.
to counterbalance their fans.
Big industrial fans?
Big industrial
Yeah.
fans, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Here's the more traditional stuff that you'll be familiar with, that you run into with these type of products. I mean, the S-clips, you know, if you want to keep two panels separated, you don't want them scratching, maybe for some transportation purposes,
The S-type.
you know. And you've got all the different variations here. So you can have a barb on all three legs if you wanted to cut in. But I mean, this is pretty straightforward, you know, you just, two panels, you're fastening them together, easy piece of spring steel, push it over. All you really need to know is the panel range. That's really all you need to know here, right? Now, length and width could be an issue if it's in a compressed area, but pretty straightforward, right? I mean, you can use these anywhere. I was in a manufacturing facility once, and they just had mats that they used, that they would just put in different areas of the floor. They would just have a bunch of clips on there just to hold them together while they stack them, because they didn't want them all starting to flap.
Yep.
So they'd like attach 4 of them together, 4 more, and then when they needed them, it was real easy to just, you know, take them. Just something as simple as that. I mean, that's not a typical application.
Yeah.
But you can, you know, it's just. Right, and then here's kind of more of the going to now, you can't go on the edge again, you got a hole in the middle of the panel somewhere, right? So you're snapping together stuff.
Yep.
Dart types. I think we have,
There's a couple dart types where you're snapping them through a through hole through 2 panels, and then the spring steel legs hold those 2 panels together.
and again, this is for
Cardinal panel.
lighter duty type applications. You can tell, those don't feel very robust, do they?
Right. No.
Right? I mean, there's really not that much to them, so, you know, you're not gonna be holding anything very heavy or important together with something like that.
So is this all mostly OEM? Is there any MRO type stuff?
Not a lot. There's, some of the product line finds its way into MRO, you know, like machine repair, you know, like some of the U-nuts and stuff like that. But for the most part, this is all OEM oriented.
Right.
It's going into
'Cause who would
final
bring-
assemblies of end product.
Right.
Washing machines, you know, electrical units.
Right. If it does get to MRO, the volumes are really, really small. It's
Yeah.
really low, it's just filling a tiny little bin.
Because who would repair most of that stuff?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Trim clips are very popular. And I got one of my high-tech demonstration things again to go. I've had this forever too. But, I mean, as you can see by the design of it, it pushes down over a plastic rib,
Sure.
okay? And, I mean, you can't get this thing off. I mean, it's, once it bites into that plastic, it's stuck there. So say you had a component that you wanted attached to another one that had some holes in the wall, and you could just snap it into place. That's what these are all about. You know, once it's on whatever you want to attach, you can put it anywhere that there's a correct size rectangular hole to snap it in. And all it does is work like this. Snaps into place. Those legs, as they're being pushed through that hole, again, the spring steel, it wants to compress. You know, you could feel it, but it's going to want to snap. As soon as it clears that panel, those legs pop back out again, and they're locked in.
They're used all over the interior of any of your cars.
And,
You know, all the dash panels, the A-pillar and
Door panel.
B-pillar. So you can pull those off, and those clips will be on the plastic, but they'll stay there, and then you can service the wires or whatever, and then just snap the whole plastic panel back in.
Huh.
a lot of the times.
But, you know, they found their way into industrial applications where, again, you want quick assembly, have the ability to disassemble, but not have screws showing. So that's the whole purpose of what's known as a trim clip, because it's used on, you know, pieces of trim. Even like on your refrigerator, you know, you got that bottom grill.
Yep.
Have you ever knocked that off?
Yep.
It's got a couple of clips on, I mean, I know mine does. It looks like one of these, where it's actually pushed onto a boss on that plastic grill, and then snapped into the base,
Yep.
which is the substrate or the sheet metal.
I've seen lots of these.
Yeah. And again, too, it's good because you see nothing on the front side of whatever you're attaching.
True.
It's
Hidden
aesthetic.
fasteners, basically.
And there's higher strength ones too that can be used. You can tell they're more robust, they're thicker, the legs are more pronounced. Just depends on the application. And there's just some different styles. And that's the one Dan showed you. You know, instead of pushing onto a plastic rib, it goes onto a round boss or plastic stud and self-retains. I mean, this one's a right angle. It goes, you know, it slides over the panel and then snaps at 90 degrees. And again, as I mentioned before, these all got created because there's so many different applications. I mean, everybody's got a unique application. And then, you know, some of the plastic ones, these aren't as popular. I mean, you know, the ITW Fast Techs of the world do these and pretty much, in my opinion, kind of own it.
Yeah, this is an example.
You know, they're so cheap. It's hard to compete against these, but they do offer some of the plastic.
Darts or push pins, what do they call them?
You can see some of the different variations that they have. Okay.
I was wondering what a fir tree fastener was now.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
looks like an
Yeah.
evergreen tree, right?
It does.
But again, Fast Techs, I mean, how do you compete with that,
Yeah.
right? Okay, any questions there?
Yep.
We'll move on to the last section of the catalog and the actual parts. I mean, this now is where you've got wires, cables, tubes that you're looking to route. Obviously, that'll be big in the white goods industry, washers, dryers, refrigerators, you know, anywhere that they've got a limited area to route wires and cables and whatnot. This is a product that lends itself. And you'll see that there's both metal and plastic options for this. A lot of this stuff has come now since ARaymond bought Tinnerman. You know, they're much bigger in the plastics and the injection molding than Tinnerman ever was. And as you'll see, I mean, I'll show you some of these products, but again, these are heavily automotive products that they are using over in France and Germany and those kind of applications. They've been trying for years to integrate it into the industrial side, and it's been very difficult. Because as you'll see, there's some pretty cool products, but the customer really doesn't need the cool product. They just need something cheap and easy to hold these cables and wires together. Right? So it's been almost impossible to integrate this into the industrial portion. And see, there's a bunch of different ones, and we'll not do this really quick. But so you got these cable clips, and you can see this isn't your typical, you know, just zip ties or cable ties or whatnot. I mean, you know, this will actually fasten over the edge. There's a metal clip in there that will bite into the edge, and then you've got this which can rotate. So once you have that thing assembled along the line of where you need to route these wires or cables, you know, you can just, it's very simple to install them, right? But again,
You gotta have some volume to justify the cost.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same kind of concept. This goes over the panel. That's plastic with the metal insert. This is just the you know, original Tinnerman metal one. That's more for like wire bundles. That's a pretty good size opening there. But tube mounts, you know, if you're running cables or tubes and you don't want them to be jiggling around, or you want them to stay a certain length apart, I mean, you can just snap these onto that. And then you got these where you can just, if there's a hole, you can pop these right into a hole and I mean, it's a neat concept in theory, but it really hasn't gotten itself into the industrial arena.
Or is it mostly then auto?
Automotive.
Yeah. And this was more the ARaymond stuff. Once they purchased Tinnerman, that they tried to integrate, and
Yeah, heavy truck.
there's even an adhesive one there. You know, you just tear off the little piece. It took me forever to get that in there. Cut it and paste it. I'm just saying. So yeah, I'm not going to cover much more than that, because again, and you can see him kind of in action here. But again, you're not going to bump it. I don't think you'll bump into this very much at all, quite frankly. And I don't think we're stocking.
No, and we're carrying more of the metal versions than we are the plastic. That's more the traditional Tinnerman, like what John has there, the cable clips that clips over a panel, and then it's in a position to route a wire or tube.
Cool.
So that wraps up the portion of the products. So any other questions on that? And again, I know it's a lot, and as you're working with the product, you know, reach out anytime. Email me, call me, whatever, Dan as well. You know, we enjoy working with this stuff for whatever reason. Still. I encourage you to do that. Reach out if you have any questions whatsoever.
It's awesome.
So
I
real,
can't tell you how much it's good.
what?
Just, I
Yeah.
do a lot more fun with it.
Good.
That's good. No, that's good. And that's usually the case, right?
Yeah.
But again, just trying to, hopefully it makes it easier in your mind to like compartmentalize these different, so many products. There's really only so many categories that they exist in.
Right.
4 application types.
So what I want to do in here, you know, because a lot of times, well, more oftentimes you'll get the part numbers or whatnot, but somebody may call in with a application question or whatever. So I'm just going to run you real quick through one that I had gotten recently that I think is a pretty good example, and give you an idea of some of the questions to ask, you know, when something like this might come along. This is probably something pretty advanced for, you know, depending on how much knowledge you have with it, but, you know, it's something to kind of strive toward. You're always going to want to ask questions, like we talked about throughout this whole thing. And this is a good guide on how to ask them, because you know what product they're looking at, panel, throat, those kind of things. Those are easy questions to ask, and they can offer up a lot of information. Helps you understand the application better. Again, your goal should be something off the shelf. You know, I mean, it'd be cool to design something in theory, but the chances of it happening with the budgets these people have, pretty nil. Probably not gonna happen. You know, offer options, like we said before, if something's obsolete or inactive, you know, offer something else. You know that big panel range might fit what Tinnerman obsoleted. And then of course, like we said, samples are the best. So I got this email. Now this guy, he had some pretty good information for me. Okay, he knew he wanted some push nuts, pal nuts. He knew what his shaft diameter was. And immediately looking at that, I knew we're gonna have an issue. Because that's odd, right? And look at the tolerances, right? So, told me it fits into a hole like that. He even gave me like the material of the shaft. He said he found a Tinnerman part that kind of looked like something that he'd be able, other than the OD, so it doesn't fit in his hole. So it's not gonna work, you already know that. Right? You know, he said the pallet should be harder than the material it is grabbing. He's right. You know, I mean, if you're gonna push down something over a stud, it can't be harder than the stud, because it's not gonna work, right?
The stud can't be harder than the retainer.
Correct, correct. You know, and they don't list hardness. And that goes back to what we were talking about. We're not gonna give them that information, because every application is different, right? So we're gonna try to find out what his material is possibly or whatever, but we're not gonna be able to provide that. But we can do testing for him, or we can send him samples and he can do it, right? He still wanted to buy some of these for testing or anything else. So he's looking for help, right? So, I mean, it'd be pretty easy just to send him the samples like he said, take a look at them, and then, you know, mock up something and send it to me. But instead, so what I did is I went in, could not find a standard. Could not find a standard. So I said, you know, it sounds like you expressed an interest in developing a non-standard or special. I said, if so, I got a couple of questions, because I had a feeling the chances of this happening are probably not real good. So let's get this information up front before we go too far down this path, right? So one of the best questions to ask right off the bat, what's your EAU? What's your annual EAU? That's going to tell you a ton right off the bat, right? I asked them, you know, do you have a tooling budget? Because as we talked, if it's special, you're going to need $250,000 minimum, and they're going to have to pay for the tool. Thousands of dollars for a tool. I told them we want to modify existing tooling if possible first, but it's going to be new if not, right? So then he had mentioned that it fits into that 322 hole. I said, does that mean the OD would need to be less than 322? And do you have an ideal OD in mind, right? Trying to get some more information out of him based on what he told me, instead of just assuming we got to find something that's 322. Then I asked him for a drawing. Why not, right? Do you have something, a concept in mind, what you're looking for? And then I said, what's your time frame for the production of this? And I sent that up to him. So he came back, everything in red is what he came back with, and offered up an awful lot of information. And the first thing, you know, he wasn't really sure. He said, typical year we might build 8,000 assemblies. We could use 4, 10, or 20 of the nuts per assembly. So I'm thinking, this guy really does not know where he runs. But even if he used 20 and 8,000 assemblies, you're still nowhere near what you're going to need to tool something up. And he's not going to use 20 per assembly. I mean, I'll sell them to him, but he doesn't need them. So, you know, the tooling budget. He said, yeah, we expect to pay some non-recurrent expenditures. You know, give me the most competitive quote. Okay, it fits into the 322 hole. He said, we changed this to give more space. He said, see attached, and I'll show you again. I'll show you what he sent me in a minute. But, you know, he said, now the OD is going to be 370, so it changed. Typically, these parts are manufactured from 1050 spring steel. I go, are there any salt spray requirements? You know, I'm trying to figure out what environment this is in. He said, something more corrosion resistant, see attached. I'll show you what he sent there, too. And then, you know, the drawing is attached, and then the time frame, he wanted to get some testing as soon as possible, right? So just asking those 5 questions, we got a ton of information, and this, he sent me this, with the drawing and all his requirements and whatnot, just by asking those few questions, right? So it is important, and it's very easy to do. You can do it quickly. I mean, I tried to call him first, because I'd rather do that over the phone, because that takes even less time.
Yeah.
But he didn't answer, so I did this and got what I needed. But, the bottom line here is, this isn't something where it's going, looks like it's gonna work. And it's gonna save us a lot of time doing this up front, right? And he's gonna be appreciative of it too. He just doesn't know it yet. This is kind of what he sent me. So when I asked him about the material and the environment and whatnot, here's what he sent as what they need. They can't use 18/8 stainless. They've got to use this 17. I didn't even know what these were. I'll be honest. I'm not embarrassed to say. I didn't know these materials at all.
What is it?
It looks like a retaining ring.
That's a retaining ring for a 15.
Well, this is separate from this. This was just the finish and the material requirements. This, I was trying to help him find an alternate solution. Tinnerman had nothing and wanted nothing to do with it. That's typical because the body, they're just like, sorry. So I went to Mike at Dye Company. And even Mike said, this is gonna be real difficult to do. He says, send him this, because I know I can modify that impression and I can hold that 202 diameter tolerance. But he's probably gonna have to live with this 450 ID, right? So I sent that to him too, and obviously, thanks, but we cannot change that ID. So you're learning these things as you're doing, right? So ultimately, we didn't move forward with the opportunity, but the guy was very thankful. And I told him, I said, the chances of you finding somebody to do this are pretty nil. And he said that they're probably gonna look at adjusting and looking at applications to see if they can get closer to some of the stuff, and he might be back with us, right? But those are the kind of questions that you can ask, even for something not this detailed, just EAU, environment, application, you can get a ton of information on the customer, right?
Do you see it a lot where engineers like that will change their application to fit a standard?
It takes them a while, but they, a lot of times they'll do it, because they're very proud of it.
They have to sooner or later.
I get it, right? They'll work very hard to try to find what they're looking for, but ultimately they're gonna figure out that they gotta make some changes or they gotta go a completely different route in connecting. So,
Awesome.
yeah. So other than that, now you guys said you have used this portal a little bit, right? Are you guys comfortable with it, or what do you use it for? Just looking at
I've only been
parts?
in there a couple of times.
Okay.
We just use it for stock and lead time.
Okay.
And then price breaks, of
Okay.
course.
Well, we got a few minutes left. I'll fire it up and just kind of show you just some of the other things you can do in there. Again, I wish I could show you a product search, but we'll have to wait for a later date. We may be able to do that online sometime, like a Zoom type thing, because they're changing the whole thing,
Yeah, that'd work.
right? Okay, so this is what you guys are familiar with, right? This
Yes.
portal stage. And you guys are good, with the asterisk, knowing that you gotta put that on there to call the parts up? Those kind
At
of,
the end
I've
of
never
the,
Did you
used
know
that
that?
asterisk, no.
end of,
so if you don't, it probably won't call anything up. And you might just think it's obsolete, because like if you, say,
Usually what we have is, the part's already in IMI, so I have the SAP number.
oh,
So I'm able to
okay,
just
okay,
use
well,
that
that's
one.
good, that's good. And with those SAP numbers now, the finish is all jacked up, right? You don't know what finish is on them, it could be different.
Mm-mm.
So before it had like the -4, the -27, you kind of could know what that is.
Uh-huh.
Now, it just goes in order of how they sell it against their SAP part. So 001 at the end of an SAP part could be phosphate and oil for one part, and it could be a zinc electroplate for another part.
Oh.
That makes a lot of sense.
it's parts.
Does it?
Oh.
Yeah, so you gotta watch that. Now, I think what they've done on the SAP, if you click on the SAP number and call up the drawing, in the upper left-hand corner of the drawing, they're starting to list what finishes
What finishes.
are available.
Oh, okay.
So that'll help you,
Mhm.
but, yeah, they do some pretty silly things. As far as I'm
But
concerned.
let's use
Oh,
that
sorry.
example, Dave, maybe, like Shelby, if someone came to you with a legacy Tinnerman part number. They didn't have the SAP number. Maybe we didn't have it set up in IMI. You know, you could use that as a search and just use that little asterisk as a wildcard at the end, and then click that box where it says, look at all inactive parts, and then it'll pull up all the parts that are available. And it will give you the SAP number
With that.
against the legacy part number.
Does Tinnerman ever reactivate part numbers?
They have, you gotta have really good volume for them to consider reactivating something.
Okay.
A good reason.
And they'll ask you 1,000 questions.
Hey, put a new part number on it.
Yeah.
What did you want to show?
Oh, just pull up a legacy part number just to show how to look that up using the wild card.
Used to have my keyboard, it just drives me nuts.
And then you want to click the display inactive materials.
Mhm.
And so that's the legacy part number, and then it brings up everything that falls into that 1663 series for the different thicknesses and different finishes.
Okay.
Quite the option.
Yeah, see, the arrow down here, there's more.
Yeah.
And be careful too, you know, since they made this transition from closing Brunswick and moving stuff to Logansport. So if you call up the legacy part number, it'll say inactive Brunswick. That's all it'll show. But it's not inactive in Logansport. You have to go in under the SAP number for it to show up as active in Logansport. They're trying to fix that. But just so be careful, because you may call it up and it'll say inactive. And you won't see that that's in Logansport. So call up the corresponding SAP number as well, which probably will bring it up.
Where will it say inactive at? Oh, right there.
Yeah, it
Okay.
says
Got
INA.
it. Got it.
Yeah.
Because there is no more Brunswick. Everything that was Brunswick is inactive, but it should be residing somewhere else, which is
Okay.
mainly Logansport or Hamilton.
Yep. So I mean, this is a handy tool. You can tell whether there's stock available and whatnot. You guys have seen the last purchase price option. Have you seen that? And
I just typically go into the regular pricing. Just
Okay.
to-
you can even tell like who last purchased it sometimes, you know, if they've got.
That's pretty cool.
So like, I don't know, hopefully.
Like if they sold it to another distributor?
Yeah, see, if you click on this item,
You gray it out.
grade it out, and then click on this last purchase. And of course, I pick one that has, oh, wait, there it is, yeah. Look at that, it tells you who and when bought it. You know, so if we've got somebody that's out of stock, or coming to us and we don't have any, you know, sometimes we can
Work with somebody else.
work with Bolt and get them.
Doesn't Bolt have to come to us now though?
Yeah, that's happening, yeah.
Yeah.
Cause I know, John Doherty or whoever, he comes to me a lot for
Okay,
the spot buy stuff.
okay.
From Bolt.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How are they to work with?
He's not bad. He's
Alright.
honestly, he's left me like 3 5-star reviews online. So.
Oh, really?
Oh, nice.
Well, good.
Yeah, because they're getting rationalized from Tinnerman. They had the access to buy direct from Tinnerman, but Tinnerman has decided they no longer want to sell them direct. It's Bolt Products, Build Industries, which is out of Idaho. They're kind of aerospace related, and Bisco.
Mhm.
You know, we've seen a lot of activity with Bisco, particularly on the Shearex side of things. Well, now Tinnerman's rationalizing Bisco, so Bisco's and Bolt and Build are going to get the options of GL Hewitt or Advanced Components. It may be Index, it may be HW Eckert,
Okay.
but we'll beat them all.
Yeah. You know, like I said too, I mean, if you click the pricing button, all the quantity price breaks from Tinnerman come up. Something to pay attention to here though too, see the price in the left-hand column there?
Mhm.
If it says like $73.99, $49.99,
The 99s.
anything with a 99 cent on the end of it, that's only available if there's inventory above. So like in this case, there's 9,400 pieces and you could buy. If there's no inventory, you have to buy starting at this price break.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That's explained there, so it's on there, but it's good to know.
Yeah.
Because if you're, you know, trying to figure out what the min MOQ is, you can come here from Tinnerman and find out. But don't say 30,000 because it really is 60,000 because of where that price point is. That's what their minimum is. And you can even get a drawing. Like if a customer asks for a drawing, it'll download it for you. Supposedly. It's not working. But, and then you can just save it and send it to the customer. Yeah, see?
There you
Cool.
go. Nice, huh?
Boss that receiver.
Yep.
And this is where Dave was saying the SAP part numbers, and then the dash is the corresponding finish.
And it explains what it is.
So SAP's our new number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It went out.
But that's pretty much what I wanted to
Yeah.
show anyway.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we use it all the time. I mean,
Yep.
for availability and minimums and who purchased it last, and the drawings.
Do you typically make them take whatever the minute, like on that one, it was a 60K minimum?
That depends. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of gotten to a point where if we've had other demand on that item, we've had other customers come to us, and we got someone that's wanting like 30,000 pieces, and we don't have enough inventory for them. We would probably say, okay, we'll buy the 60,000 minimum because we have other customers that use it, and we'll sell you the 30,000 that you need. Now, if we don't have any demand on it, we have to make a business decision, and then we kind of assess, well, how many other distributors have bought that part? Would there be any chance any of them would come to us? In some cases that we don't think that's really likely, then we would probably have to tell the customer, we got to work with you on the 60,000 piece minimum. You'd have to commit to them, maybe we'll let you take them in 2 releases or something like that. Try to soften the blow for them a little bit, but it's a business, it's a decision based upon what other demand that either we've had or we know that Tinnerman has had that we could take advantage of.
And sometimes it's who the customer is decision too. That factors into it. So I just had one a couple weeks ago with the Fastenal, who won that Crown equipment business, and we've gotten a ton of business from them. And they needed a Tinnerman item where he only uses about 20,000 a year. Our minimum's 50. I know he's going to use it for the next couple of years. I explained it to him. He's like, and normally he'll bring the stuff in. He said, Dave, here I just can't do it. So we looked at it and we said, for this customer, it makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll buy the 50. We're going to get rid of them. And so in that case, we did it.
Makes sense.
Right? So we can if we need to. We don't like to make a history because you don't want stuff sitting. Especially with Scott sitting here in the inventory sitting on the shelf.
Yeah, a lot of times Maria, she'll contact Dave or I and say, hey, what do you think of this situation? And we'll kind of consult and decide what the best to do. We might talk to the customer and say, hey, here's what we're facing, how can we work together?
Well, those are always important decisions to make because sometimes you leave inventory on the shelf, and that's a good thing. Obviously, we don't want to have inventory sitting on the shelf forever that doesn't move.
Right.
But, this is a market, to my understanding, this is a market that we want to continue to build and grow, and because there's a lot of opportunity in it for us.
Yeah.
So sometimes we end up with stuff on the shelf. There's been stuff in the past we had, brought stuff in on the shelf, and some of it, it's probably still sitting here from years ago.
Right.
Maybe here and there's items like that with this, but, we have to take the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the biggest thing is, just getting some of this knowledge and being able to help that customer. Because, the competition will stop when they see an inactive part, or they don't want to look too hard. With your ability just to understand those few concepts, you can potentially help them find an alternate, get them some samples. And then the next time they have a Tinnerman issue, who are they going to call? They'll come back,
Yeah.
right? So. Well, that's all I got.
That's
If you guys
fantastic.
had any more questions, or like I said, feel free to reach out.
Where are you gonna store this PowerPoint at?
We're
Want
gonna have
copy?
it in the J drive with the other trains. We'll have that in the video in there for everyone else.
Oh, good.
This goes to 11, right? So I can ask a question?
Yes,
Sure.
go ahead.
Because I wasn't in the beginning of it, you said that these parts are really broken out into 4 categories or 4 applications.
4 application types.
4 application types. What are those again?
Sure, we'll go back to that slide, but basically they're screw together, where you have access to both sides of the joint, or screw together where you don't have access to both sides of the joint, which would be blind assembly.
Okay,
Snap together, where there's, snap together is a third one. And then joints that use non-threaded members or studs. And then the
okay,
fourth is wire management or routing.
right here.
So yeah,
That's
screw
line.
together, non-threaded joints, snap together, cable and wire management.
Okay,
And within each, there's different, product types, but the basic 4 applications are those.
so when you begin asking these questions with a customer, how often, I suppose probably most of the time you're not jumping categories.
You're typically not, you're staying kind of in the lane of
Right,
where they're.
and try to figure out the best part for that application.
Right, exactly.
And quite frankly too, I mean, a lot of times they kind of know too. Because again, it's really, they would have a screw, unthreaded stud,
Yep.
or they're just trying to snap some things together. I mean, when you get it that simple, it's not hard to get to the appropriate area.
And then another question I have then is from a hardness standpoint, you talk about that paddle nut application, and you gotta be careful with the hardness of that thing. We want the fastener itself to be harder than the material it's gripping, I presume, so that it will kind of cut into it just a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta get that friction fit.
And that's not something that, is that something that, as far as that hardness is concerned, we have the customer take on that responsibility? Is that something that's a part of what Tinnerman does? I mean, how is it you determine that?
Well, we can easily provide the hardness of the item that we're selling.
Okay,
So that, we can give them that.
gotcha.
And we say, hey, what are you pushing this over? What material is it? It can't be any harder than this. So I mean,
Gotcha,
it's that simple.
gotcha.
Because
Okay.
we can provide that info, right? I mean, it's on the drawings. If we don't have a drawing, we can get one from Tinnerman pretty quickly. So we can provide that information
Okay.
pretty, then it's on them to make sure that they're not doing something
Yeah,
silly.
the majority of the Tinnerman product and panel nut is 1050 high carbon spring steel, that when you heat treat it, it's at a Rockwell of 45 to 51 on the C scale.
Okay,
Now, they do have other materials, they can go to 1070 and hard,
Yeah, harder.
Rockwell is a little bit harder, but that's kind of like the most common, 1050, Rockwell 45 to 51.
okay. Good, thanks.
Yeah, so. All right, guys, we appreciate your time.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
appreciate your
very, very
attention.
much.
Seriously, any questions, just call us, email us. I mean, I know that's, Maria's been done pretty well with this line. She's learned it pretty well, but, I mean, she reaches out to me constantly, which is good. I mean, that's what I've encouraged, right? Because that's how you learn it.